anything I say you should not consider today because I just whacked my forehead on my car door. You see this cut?
No. Oh, wait. There's a bump.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So I'm like, I grabbed
Do you have peas? Frozen peas?
Chorizo.
Oh. Okay. It's a little solid, but...
From New York Times Opinion, I'm Ross Douthat.
I'm Michelle Cottle.
I'm Carlos Lozada.
And I'm Lydia Polgreen.
And this is Matter of Opinion. This week, amid general dissatisfaction with the likely Democratic and Republican nominees for president in 2024, we're going to be talking about long shots and third-party candidates. So we'll talk about those people who have been brave and stupid enough to enter the race as long shot candidates, and then who we think the candidates that America actually deserves would be. Last week, Minnesota Representative Dean Phillips threw his hat into the ring to compete with Joe Biden for the Democratic presidential nomination. And meanwhile, we have both Cornel West and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running as more prominent than usual independent candidates. We're at a weird moment in presidential campaign history. We have two all but assumed nominees who have both held the office of the presidency and both lack full party enthusiasm. So let's start with the real newcomer. Let's be honest, guys. Who here has heard of Dean Phillips before?
Well, I have an advantage, which is that I am, as careful listeners of the podcast will know, a native of the state of Minnesota. I always take notice when a Minnesotan steps onto the national stage because it sort of feels like we have this bumper crop of incredible politicians and yet have never managed to get the presidency. So there are a lot of things to be said about Dean Phillips. I think he's a very interesting candidate. And, there was a fascinating profile of him in The Atlantic that we should talk about. But the first thing I just want to note is how many Minnesotans have tried to win the presidency and have failed. From, Walter Mondale, Eugene McCarthy, so many. Paul Wellstone, my personal favorite. So one of the things that strikes me, though, about Dean Phillips is that he does seem like a particular product of the kind of political ecology of Minnesota, which is, famously a pretty nice place. And he seems like a person of tremendous sincerity, but who's also, I think, deeply, deeply conflicted about this little journey that he's about to embark upon. I'm curious what other people think.
I'm sorry, who? I mean, I cover Congress, and I could not care less, other than what he represents. What he represents is people are casting about and dissatisfied. But as far as, like, an actual individual?
Yeah, I did not know who he was at all. I started scrolling through the other Phillipses in my head, and I thought of
Wilson Phillips.
I thought of hold back for one more day. Yeah, I thought of Kevin Phillips, who just died, the Republican strategist, author of Emerging Republican Majority. I thought of Stone Phillips, the anchor, but I was like, who's Dean? I have no idea.
Howard Phillips, a conservative
now you're going deep.
activist and presidential candidate, I think, for the Libertarian Party.
You would know, Ross.
I'm sorry. It was the Constitution. It was the U.S. Taxpayers Party, now known as the Constitution Party. I have failed my conservative brethren.
It's always a good sign when your party changes its name a lot. That's always a good sign of stability and endurance.
Yeah,
usually.
Ross, did you know him at all?
Like all other non-Minnesotans, I had perhaps heard Dean Phillips' name once in passing, but I have learned about him. I have learned, for instance, that he ran Talenti Gelato, which is maybe not the best gelato in the world, but one that I believe I have eaten.
I do enjoy it.
It's pretty good.
It's lovely. It's solid.
Yeah, and Dean Phillips was recently profiled by Tim Alberta in The Atlantic, and what I learned from Alberta's profile, which is quite interesting, very friendly, it should be said, but, that he has manifested in his own being the agony of all of those Democrats who feel like Joe Biden should not be president again, and more than that, feel like he has a very good chance of losing a race to Donald Trump that some more generic Democrat, say a Democrat from Minnesota, say Amy Klobuchar, would be on track to win easily. But unlike all of those other Democrats, Phillips has decided to try and do something about it. And I mean, not to be naive about the intentions of any American politician, even one from the great state of Minnesota, but I think what he's doing is admirable. What do you guys think?
I mean, I came into it quite skeptical. I knew that he was a very successful businessman. He really represents a kind of centrist, modestly pro-business, worried about the over-influence of the left on the Democratic Party, and came across in the profile, I thought, as a person of real integrity who had good motivations for doing what he wants to do. And I came away interested and impressed. I mean, there are lots of slightly questionable characters flitting around him, but I guess you can't really choose the top shelf.
Not to question the congressman's motivations or to question whether or not he's an interesting figure, but I don't have to remind everybody.
You're clearly questioning whether he's an interesting figure.
It's like starting with no offense, but yeah.
Well, I don't have to remind people of what happens when even deeply unpopular especially deeply unpopular incumbents are challenged within their own party. There's been twice in modern, politics, Truman in 1952 and LBJ were challenged and nudged out of running again. And you know what happened? Both times it went to the other party. There are just a lot of moving pieces when you challenge an incumbent, no matter how much you worry about him, that make this a very dangerous proposition. It's not a kind of free-for-all like you see when you are out of power. There are lots and lots of things to consider, and it usually does not go well, which is fine if on the other side of this evil equation weren't the most sinister politician to ever hold that office, waiting to come back and wreak unholy havoc.
The implication of what you're saying, Michelle, is that the primary challenge is what weakens the candidate, whereas it may well be...
No, he got nudged. They get nudged out.
No, but I'm saying it well may be that it is the weak candidate that attracts the primary challenge.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Right. I mean, Harry Truman, had he run again in the midst of the stalemated Korean War when he was desperately unpopular, would have lost to Dwight Eisenhower by at least as much as Adlai Stevenson did. And, say what you will about Hubert Humphrey in 1968.
I'm sure there's much to say about
There's
Hubert
much
Humphrey.
to say, but that was an excruciatingly close election that he very nearly won. He was sabotaged.
We can talk all day about how it could have come out or what might have happened, but I'm just saying there's no example in history where this went well. So we can cheer Dean Phillips for giving it a good go, but do we really think this is going to be useful? What's the good that's going to come out of this? Dean Phillips 2024?
No, that would be the hilarious outcome. Come on. The good outcome for the Democrats, which is the one that Mr. Phillips claims to be seeking, is a scenario where he overperforms in early states to a degree that makes Biden drop out and brings in, let's say, Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer or a certain governor of California who shall not be named by me as a potential replacement for Biden. Now, is that a crazy scenario that one won't happen and creates a sort of free-for-all and so on? Yes.
Yes,
is it obviously the case that the endpoint of that is a rival to Trump who would be weaker than a Joe Biden who can't even beat Dean Phillips?
We are so far out from this election.
This is Phillips' own proposition will be tested by his campaign. If he can't make any headway against Biden, then that's a sign that Biden, can still pull it off. If he does make headway against Biden, what does that tell you about Biden's prospects against Trump?
I'm not worried about him making headway against Biden. I'm more worried about potentially this no labels third party stuff that's going on.
Right. We have already in the race a candidate who is in current polls doing as well as any third party candidate since Ross Perot, which is RFK Jr. I think there's several open questions about those numbers, one of which is how many of those are voters who think that he is his father, which is a serious issue for
that's
all
always a serious thing.
RFK Jr. polls. But a fact that then raises the question that I think both the Biden team and the Trump team are thinking about, which I will rely on you guys to answer, which is who does RFK Jr. hurt most in the event that he pulls anywhere from 4 to 12% in the final race? Who does he hurt more, Trump or Biden?
Well, I mean, so far the polling seems to indicate that he will hurt Trump more, I think, because of his anti-vax stances and things like that. But I have two pieces of anecdotal evidence for sort of who is interested in RFK Jr. Over the summer, I was out in Long Island walking on a beach filled with very, very rich people, visiting a friend. And I walked by somebody, a pair of very well-dressed men on a Hamptons beach, and overheard them saying to the other, "You know who I really like? I really like RFK Jr."
That's data right there.
Right, data right there.
So he's going to carry the Hamptons.
Data right there. And then data point 2 last weekend, and now I'm, clearly exposing the places that I go on weekends, but I was up in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which is another sort of like what you would think of as a liberal moneyed enclave. And there was not one, but I think 2 separate tables set up in the downtown area to collect signatures and hand out stickers for RFK Jr. Of course, this is Massachusetts, the home state of the Kennedys, and it is this kind of like woo liberal enclave. So maybe that
a lot of unvaccinated children in greater Great Barrington.
Exactly. So, I think that there's like an element of chaos with kind of who is drawn to RFK Jr.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen polls. There have been several polls. And as far as I can tell, a couple of them showed him hurting Trump and a couple of them showed him hurting Biden. And I think it is a sort of chaotic uncertainty.
And he's making that weird play for the tech bros. I mean, he's got these weird videos up on social media of him shirtless doing push-ups and doing that macho performative stuff. I mean, yeah, whatever, bro.
There's a sort of in case of emergency break glass kind of vibe to some of the fringier candidates that are hovering in this campaign. Even on the Republican side, I feel that I'm sure that there are some of the candidates who are in this kind of weird non-primary primary who are just thinking like, well, if he goes to jail or something happens, like they'll have to pick someone.
Yep.
And on the Democratic side, I think that there's this sense of like, well, if Biden has a real health episode or something happens, then they've got to pick someone. Typically, we've thought of long shot candidates as people who have like one important issue that they're focused on, that they're peddling, right? The Ralph Nader approach. I think Cornel West is kind of like this as well.
Ross Perot,
yeah, I feel that there's some of that in this campaign, but I think there's also just this kind of like, what if something super crazy happens and I want to have my hat in the ring?
Although, to be fair, it's not super crazy. I mean, people worry about Biden's health. But on the Republican side, look, Trump is old, he's unhealthy, and he's clearly cracking under the pressure of all these legal issues. Why wouldn't somebody think, well, his health may just not hold? He's not a spry guy.
Right. But I just want to, on this point about crazy things happening, I just want to press maybe Michelle in particular, because you're doing so much eye rolling about all of these challengers, right? So let's stipulate RFK Jr. is not in the race to sort of provide a responsible alternative to the chaos of Biden and Trump. But you mentioned this sort of no labels centrism, right? These people who want to have a kind of moderate candidate of some sort in the race. Let's use Joe Manchin as sort of an embodiment of that. Isn't there an argument that there is a totally plausible world where 2 months before the election, Donald Trump is being imprisoned and Joe Biden is having a major health episode? Why wouldn't it be responsible for a bunch of centrists to have someone like Joe Manchin standing there saying, okay, 46% of America can default to me? What is wrong with that morally?
I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to do this or these guys aren't entitled to do this. I'm just saying it makes me extremely nervous under the circumstances that they're doing this on the off chance that maybe some circumstance will arise where it might be useful, as opposed to what is more likely, which is that a la Ralph Nader or Ross Perot, you could wind up throwing this race to a man who is infinitely more dangerous than anyone we have seen in the office.
Infinitely. All right, lightning round, and then we'll take a break. For each of you, what odds do you give it that either Trump or Biden is not the nominee in whatever way for president when November 24 rolls around, and which of them do you think is more likely not to be on the ticket? Carlos, since you are a master of prognostication, please go first.
I believe that there's a 85% chance that each of them becomes the nominee. And therefore, I'll do, 0.85 times 0.85. And that means that somewhere in the 70% chance that they both are the nominee, which means that somewhere I'll say around 25% chance that one of them is not.
Okay, which one? You have to choose which one
Which one is more likely to not be on the ballot?
Yes, that is the question.
I would say Donald Trump, just because of the legal cases against him.
Okay, Lydia.
If I had to choose one that would be less likely to stand at the end of all of this, I would probably go with Carlos and say Donald Trump. But really, anything is possible, and I don't like to make predictions.
All right, I'll let you off without a literal percentage. You're refusing
Thank you.
math.
By the way, I just multiplied 0.85 times 0.85, and it's actually comes out to 0.72. So that means there's a 28% chance. 28% chance.
Okay, Michelle, I don't know what you're going to say. I think you're going to say Biden's going to be on the ballot because you're ride or die.
No, I'm not ride or die. I'm afraid somebody else is going to ride or die. Actually, I refuse to pick because it's all a question for me of health. And I don't know who's got the worst health. We can pretend actuarial tables and age isn't what it is, but here we are, and either one of them could have a reason that they could not be on the ticket. And I'm not going to be bullied by you, Ross. I'm not.
Well, we need a bolder statement, and since I believe in providential interpretations of history, and it's clear that God is driving America deeper into some sort of mixture of chastisement and crisis, I'm going to go up to let's say 45% that there is some totally race scrambling event that takes one of them off the ballot. And just to diverge from my fellows, I'm going to say that it's more likely to be Biden because I think God is going to punish Democrats for not listening to the entirely reasonable, desperate plaints of the gelato millionaire, Dean Phillips.
Plus schnapps. You keep leaving out
We
the
didn't even
schnapps.
talk about the schnapps.
That's his way to go. Just promise everybody schnapps.
On that ice cream and schnapps note, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, after doom and apocalypse, we're going to talk about more ideal and fanciful scenarios. So stay with us. And we're back. So now that we've waded through despair, gloom, and apocalyptic scenarios about the 2024 presidential campaign, I want to put all of my co-hosts on the spot once again. But instead of predictions of doom and catastrophe, I want visions of American Renaissance.
Good luck.
The laughter. Since so many voters seem to be so over a Trump-Biden rematch in advance, I want to ask each of you what your ideal matchup would actually be. Who do you wish was going head-to-head for president in 2024? And since I went last time, having posed this question, I will answer it myself first, just so everyone has time to gather their feelings and nobody feels bullied Michelle.
No, you can't shame me.
I'm going to say that I would like to see a race between J.D. Vance of Ohio and my home state senator, Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. And I think the Vance pick, in spite of, or maybe because of some of the hatred he inspires, people will find predictable coming from me. I'm a defender of certain forms of Republican populism. I think it's good for the Republican Party to think new thoughts about economic policy, which I think Vance, as a candidate and senator, has tried to do. He's also the only current senator who I knew personally before he was elected to the Senate. And, it's always good to have some personal knowledge of someone running for president. But I think Vance would represent a much more interesting vision of Republican policy than any of the non-Trump challengers in the race right now. And I think pairing him with Murphy would actually be really interesting because on the one hand, on a certain set of issues, they're way, way apart. Murphy has been a pretty conventional liberal Democrat throughout his time in office, and he's a foreign policy hawk, whereas Vance is famously one of the more dovish figures on the right. And I think that's a landscape where America could benefit from a pretty sharp debate. You get a really strong contrast of visions. At the same time, especially lately, Murphy has been doing a lot of really interesting thinking and talking about sort of cultural crisis in American life. Despair, anxiety, suicidality, the problem of the internet and what it may be doing to younger Americans especially. And there's some interesting overlap between that kind of liberal concern about the state of our culture and some of Vance's perspectives from the right. So I think you get strong clash in foreign policy, interesting overlap and dialogue on the domestic front. They're both younger. And again, I have connections to them both. So what could be better? That's my pick. And now I'm going to turn to you.
We don't get to pick you apart?
No,
what?
no.
You just get to say that?
No, there's no picking apart. You just get to say
What?
it.
You just get to throw that out there?
Yes, I do. I'm in charge.
We have a little hillbilly jealousy going on here.
I'm in charge here. No one gets to comment. Vance versus Murphy. It's going to be amazing. And Michelle, who are you picking?
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going a different way. I'm going Gretchen Whitmer versus Glenn
Good.
Youngkin.
Okay. Let's hear
And in
it.
part, this is my strong, enduring bias for governors as presidential candidates. I like the executive experience. I like that they have to appeal to everybody in their state and get things done and have practical plans and buck stops with them, that sort of thing. Now, Whitmer and Youngkin would be interesting in part, personality-wise, she's kind of got a badass reputation for, drawing attacks during COVID and that whole unfortunate let's kidnap her and assassinate her plot. Youngkin is the soccer daddy kind of genial face.
Soccer daddy.
Yeah, he's your soccer daddy.
He's the new sugar daddy. Yeah, soccer daddy.
And admit it, I've spent the last couple of weekends tracking him through Virginia because I'm writing about him, and I've watched him on the stump. He has a very good retail political touch. He's got a lot of crossover appeal. Virginia, he won Virginia with the help of independents. So as far as policy goes, this would also bring abortion to the forefront. I mean, this is a big thing for Whitmer. She has fought for abortion access rights in her tenure as governor, and Youngkin is trying something in Virginia where he's pitching himself with a 15-week abortion ban as the reasonable compromise on this issue. Now, I'm not sure that Virginia voters, based on polling,
That dog's not going to hunt.
But
yeah,
he is trying something. And just more generally, he is trying to find a way forward past Trumpism for the party. He's all about upbeat, forward, future, practical, common sense is his favorite word in the world. And I have no idea if that has
common sense
any.
is his favorite
Oh,
word?
gosh.
Common sense is like, so he's trying
The most meaningless word in the world.
literally,
conservatism
I cannot tell you how
with
much.
a friendly face.
Contain yourself.
Oh, wait.
The
Ross
term-
says that we
the
can't
term-
respond.
No,
It's
you're,
like the
you're
debate.
not allowed to
can't
slap him down.
respond.
So
This is not a debate.
I have this vision of just kind of a Thunderdome cage match between the two, and I'm going hard on that.
That was beautiful, Lydia.
Everyone seems to want to debate these, Ross. I'm sorry.
This is a cheer-tatorship, not a cheerocracy, Paul Green.
Ross Douthat, strongman.
So I've cheated. I have two matchups because
I
I'm
knew
thinking
it.
I'm thinking very.
See, this is why I'm trying to run a tight ship.
So
Without
now
rules, there's chaos.
everybody can pile on.
Anarchy.
No, because I actually took this as more of a theoretical exercise because I believe it's going to be a shit show no matter what. So I actually am very, very interested in what the future of this country looks like, and so I want
Unlike
to,
your co-hosts.
I don't give a rat's ass.
Unlike no.
America's future.
I'm interested in this sort of theoretical exercise of like what the future might look like, knowing that these matchups will never happen. So the first one is testing how the various inflections of populism will unfold in this country. So I would love to see the representative from New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, against Ross's candidate, J.D. Vance, in Ohio. I think that would be a really, really fascinating matchup of two, I think, generational, if not historical political talents who have sort of sui generis created their own political lane for themselves. And I think have an extraordinary amount of charisma.
Vance?
One form of charisma
Sorry.
I find extremely repulsive. That's J.D. Vance. And the other I find extremely appealing, which is AOC. But I would love to see those two visions of American populism go head to head. The other is Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, and Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri. The reason I chose those two is that I'm very interested in the role of religion in our country. We keep hearing about how it's declining, and each of them represents a very, very different vision of faith and a different way of living faith, a different way of being a person who's a believer in politics. And I think it'd be fascinating to see them come after one another on a debate stage.
Those are excellent choices, and I'll note that we're now up to 2 votes for J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance.
Which means that he will be president.
The Moo primary.
Carlos, what do you have for us?
I have a dream matchup. It's not really a dream. You might call it a nightmare matchup. I don't know. I won't cheat like Lydia. And
Fair.
But I will say I thought about, to borrow a page from Ross choosing his own representatives, I thought about Jamie Raskin, who I greatly appreciate, who's my representative here in Montgomery County. I thought about Nikki Haley, who I sort of respected until I found out that she had blurbed Vivek Ramaswamy's book. But I finally concluded that my dream matchup is, it's coming out of nowhere, Biden versus Trump. This is not the matchup you want. It is the matchup we need. More than any other dream matchup that I can dream up, this matchup forces America to decide on first principles, on what it is about. Trump is running as an authoritarian candidate who wants to shred the Constitution. Biden's campaign, both 2020 and for 2024, are premised almost entirely on preserving American democracy. Biden has recently made a very robust case for American leadership in the world and support for democracy abroad. Trump has more isolationist tendencies, shows an affinity toward dictators. And I think that we're in a moment where we have to decide what we're about, where we have to decide where this experiment that's about to have its 250th birthday is really headed. I think it's a choice that we have to face and a choice we have to make.
Okay. All right. Now that Carlos has framed things in that way, as a choice between authoritarianism and democracy, I'm going to relax my own authoritarianism and allow anyone who has a comment on anyone else's choice to utter it.
Oh, allow me, please.
Speak now or
Please,
forever hold your peace.
Yeah, Michelle's been chomping at the bit.
All right, Michelle, let's hear it.
So I, too, find J.D. Vance fairly fascinating. So don't laugh. Right. I've interviewed him. He's a fascinating guy. I've obviously read his stuff. I've watched him. I've gone on the campaign trail with him. 2 things concern me in pitching him as this great factor, aside from his political ideology. I am not going to get into whose ideology I back. One is he's not that great on the stump. He's kind of bad at the retail politics. My bigger concern is the election denial stuff, which I've even given him a chance to kind of walk through. He doesn't have a good answer for it when you press him on it, or rather the answer that he gives is complete hogwash. So the election denial stuff stands separately in his vicious kind of defense of Trump and claiming that all of the attacks on Trump are political is a kind of issue apart from his actual politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a double disqualification, right? If we think that election denialism means that you can't be president of the United States, just kind of, that's one thing. But it also, not being an election denier, we just saw what happened in the House. That seems to be a non-starter for, major leadership in the Republican Party. So...
But we're talking fantasy baseball, right? I mean,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally fantasy.
If that's a disqualifier.
Well, no, Carlos has already chosen Donald Trump
the ultimate denier
as his ideal nominee. So I think if you're trying, independent of the specifics of Vance's case, and we also had Josh Hawley as a choice, which tells you that generally...
I can't take that seriously right now.
I'm pumping my fist like Josh Hawley outside the Capitol on Jan 6.
And I'm doing him running away from the January 6th attackers.
I do think that I like Lydia's idea of a clash of black versus white Protestantism, if you were going to frame it that way. I don't know if Hawley would be my perfect choice. In fact, I would say maybe Raphael Warnock versus the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who is
That's hardcore, my friend.
I would say a more fully authentic representative of Southern Baptist politics than Hawley, if we were going in that direction. So
fair.
I endorse the Paul Green.
He's gone from nothing to speaker to presidential nominee. It's amazing.
He's hardcore.
Him.
I mean, he takes fundamentalism to a completely different level.
But I think Warnock is a really interesting political talent. I mean, I'm curious if any of you have taken note of him or have.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democrats can't spare him as a senator in Georgia for VP, but
he'd be great.
I think he's an interesting political talent. That's for sure.
Well, and I think that there's a big advantage for Democrats. You saw a bit of this with Barack Obama in that the country is secularizing, but the Democratic coalition is more secular than the country as a whole. So there's a big advantage, I think, for African-American politicians who are comfortable, maybe more comfortable than some white Democrats, if we can say that, in a religious idiom. And obviously Warnock is an actual pastor, so he's more than comfortable. It's his vocation. But yeah, I think Joe Biden wishes he had Raphael Warnock as his vice president right now.
I think a lot of us wish that he had Raphael Warnock as his vice president.
Oh, harsh.
Each of these proposals frames one particular issue, right? Like Lydia's two proposals are about, one is about kind of the direction of economic populism in America. One is about faith. Mine is about more straight
first
up,
principles.
Democracy, first principles. What would you say, Michelle, what is the crystallizing tension of Whitmer v. Youngkin?
I don't have a crystallizing tension. I was just told to pick two people and it's governors.
No, I think Michelle is choosing the two people who the two political parties would actually choose if they were capable.
Well, and also what the future, what is the investment in the future of each of the political parties, right? And the sort of best face of both of them, I think, is if the Republicans can finally break the election denier fever and settle on a more reasonable type of candidate than Youngkin or Brian Kemp or somebody like that is definitely where you'd want to go. The Democrats, I mean, look, convince me that Whitmer isn't just, kind of a younger, more dynamic version of the same center-left Democratic consensus that
can get elected.
Many other politicians represent, right? And so I think that what's striking to me is that Whitmer feels like continuity with, where the party is going, whereas Youngkin would be trying to drag the Republicans,
rein in a party that's gone insane.
That's just gone crazy. And that to me is I think what your picks really represent is that.
I don't deal well with fantasy football type stuff with politics. I just don't.
Listen, all I know is that the real problem solvers caucus is this group of four people.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Lydia.
We fixed
if
it.
only they listened
That's
to
our
us.
tagline now.
All right. The dictatorship is coming back.
Okay. The dictatorship of the Rossitariat. All right, let's do it.
I think we should leave it there. And when we come back, hot and cold. If you want to share your dream matchups with us, dear listener, tell us who you'd like to see go head-to-head for the presidency in a voicemail by calling 212-556-7440. And we're back. And now to close things out, as always, we're going to talk about something that one of us is either hot about or extremely chilly about. Which of you has something for us?
I will be hot colding today, and unlike most cases, I'm hot on something. I'm happy about something.
Spicy.
I like something.
Good. About damn time, Carlos.
Yeah, I know. I am hot on a habit or a routine that I'm returning to after many years, and that is lap swimming. About 3 times a week, either early in the morning or late in the evening, I go to my local Y and I swim 20 laps tops, sometimes less. But it has really done wonders, not just for my sort of physical well-being, but for my mental well-being. A long time ago, I used to run road races. I did, 10Ks and did a couple of marathons. I discovered triathlon through the YMCA. And what I loved about triathlon is that you can be a mediocre swimmer, a mediocre biker, and a mediocre runner, and you're still a triathlete, right? You're just a slow one. You're just a very slow one. My kids gave me a triathlon shirt that says, "Don't drown, don't fall, don't trip."
That's so sweet.
Anyway, I stopped doing those things as sort of family obligations took over. I didn't have the time, but I've returned to the swimming leg of my triathlon. And the beauty of it for me is that precisely because I'm not a good swimmer, I have to really focus on my strokes, on my breathing, on my pacing, on my turns. So while I'm swimming, I can't think of anything else. I can't focus on the news or on the next thing I want to write. I can just be where I am completely in a kind of blank space in my own head. And it feels wonderful. And like I said, the physical fitness side of it, whatever, that's fine. That's nice, I'm sure. But really, it's a form of meditation. So that's it. I'm hot on the joys of lap swimming or whatever mediocre form of athleticism is able to clear your head.
Yeah, I am fundamentally, I think, too mediocre a swimmer to get even the necessary degree of exercise. In fact, I'm so mediocre that early in our marriage, my wife got me a swimming lesson. And it was too advanced for me, and I failed. So.
Wait, did you have the little water wings?
I had trouble. It also
water wings.
The floaties.
Well, you're really singing my song, Carlos, because I love activities that keep you from doing other things, like looking at your phone or engaging in intellectual conversation. And I do really love to be alone with my thoughts. I, however, and back to another Lydia Polgreen not so humble brag, I was a champion swimmer as a child. I was really, really, really good.
I hate you.
For reasons that, I still sort of struggle to articulate, I decided in 6th grade that I wasn't going to try out for middle school swimming. And it's always been a kind of path not taken in my life, could I have been a varsity athlete?
Lydia Ledecky.
Maybe.
Yes.
Think of the shoulders.
The shoulders. Different timeline.
Yeah, it's a different timeline. But I just want to put in a pitch for open water swimming. That's now my favorite.
Well, that's bold.
Yeah.
What about the sharks?
Well, I'm thinking more lakes and ponds, but also the sharks.
Okay, fair enough.
Not the East River.
All right, I'm gonna be cold on sharks in a future episode. It's the one thing Donald Trump is definitely right about is that sharks are bad. Carlos, that was terrific. Thank you so much, and we'll be back next time.
See you guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining our conversation. If you liked it, be sure to follow Matter of Opinion on your favorite podcast app. Matter of Opinion is produced by Sophia Alvarez-Boyd, Phoebe Lett, and Derek Arthur. It's edited by Allison Bruzek. Our fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Original music by Isaac Jones, Efim Shapiro, Carol Sabaro, Sonia Herrero, and Pat McCusker. Mixing by Carol Sabaro. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta and Christina Samuelewski. Our executive producer is Annie Rose Strasser.